This is CBC Here and Now.
This sudden spike in numbers today is historical and it represents events that have been and gone. The demand for testing in this province was really high, and our capacity to deliver on those tests in-house was exceeded.
Some people waiting more than a week for COVID results are finally getting their tests back.
The province announces it had to send tests to a lab outside the province.
Most residents have at least two, often their third dose of vaccine. And I think that is one of the main reasons why, as of yet, we have not seen a lot of severe illness.
Tracking COVID-19 outbreaks in long-term and personal care homes on the West Coast
as the number of residents and staff with the disease climbs.
A mild start to the week. Temperatures are going to drop, but another warm-up on the way for parts of the island.
Good evening and welcome to Here and Now. I'm Peter Cowan.
And I'm Carolyn Stokes. We start tonight with two more COVID-19 related deaths in this province. Two men over the age of 70 passed away, both in the Eastern Health Region. On the weekend, 6 people were in hospital, but after these two deaths, the number of hospitalizations is back to 4. There is also a high number of cases to tell you about. We'll start with today's cases, 455 new COVID-19 cases, but Public Health is also releasing the number of new positive cases from tests conducted in labs outside of the province between the end of December and last week, and that's another 680 cases for a new total of 1,135. There are now nearly 6,000 active cases in this province. The bulk of the cases announced today are in the eastern region with 946 cases. 59 of these are in central, 39 in western, and 64 in the Labrador-Grenville Health region.
We want to focus now on testing. Some people have been waiting more than a week to get the results of their COVID-19 swab. That's time off work and not knowing if they have the disease. Well, today the province revealed it has had to send samples to Ontario and Manitoba to be tested, and that's why testing has been delayed for some people. In total, more than 6,000 swabs had to be sent out. Many of those people got their results yesterday or today, leading to that big jump in new cases that Carolyn was talking about. There are still almost 3,000 samples that need to be processed. All of this because the local labs couldn't handle the volume of testing over the Christmas holiday. I asked the minister today why he didn't tell people earlier that their tests might be delayed.
Obviously, I apologize for those people for whom it has been an excessive delay. From our point of view, it was always the case that we had contingency plans to send them out. I've answered questions about that in the past, and indeed we'd done it before in February of 2021. I think we were not sure when these results would come. They arrived over the weekend and were put into the COVID tracker so people could access them through their portal, and here we are today explaining the situation. So I would argue that we've been open and transparent and as prompt as we could under the circumstances.
The health minister now says it should take about 48 hours for someone to get an appointment to get swabbed, and then an additional day or 2 for the lab to process the results. He says with more strict criteria for testing, meaning fewer people are getting tested, the lab can keep up with the current volume. But he says this is all part of dealing with COVID that is going to be around us for a long time.
It's all part and parcel, really, of our shift, our recognition that we're moving now from a pandemic phase of COVID-19 into an endemic phase where the disease, the virus will be amongst us. This is out there. It's very contagious. If you have symptoms, stay home. If you have somebody in the house who is COVID positive and you get symptoms, you've got it. The utility of the testing now is to monitor, to try and find new areas, to protect healthcare workers and essential personnel, and also to safeguard vulnerable people and the healthcare facilities and their capacity to deal with it.
Now, this is the first time the health minister has given a public briefing since it was announced he tested positive for COVID-19. He told reporters today that he's doing well.
managed at home, and it's one of those COVID-related experiences I could really have done without. It was quite a miserable time, and you know, I feel a lot better. My voice, I think, is not Sudafed. It's down to talking a lot. This is the 4th Zoom meeting I've had in the last 3 hours.
Well, the province plans to introduce a new law to prevent protests near schools and healthcare facilities. The Safe Zone legislation will be brought in this spring and will create a 50-meter zone around schools and clinics. Now, the Justice Minister says it's a direct response to anti-vax protests in St. John's this weekend that disrupted a booster clinic, as well as other protests against vax passes earlier this year.
We want to make sure that people who are going into and out of these facilities and these sites to, in this case, get vaccinations against COVID-19 are protected from intimidation and interference. They want to feel safe. They want to know that when they go to do what is right for them and for the general public in getting vaccinated, that they're protected and they don't have to worry about anything other than getting their vaccine in this case. We also want to make sure that the people who are in there, healthcare providers, other workers doing work on behalf of all people in this province aren't intimidated or affected either by doing their jobs and doing what they know is right.
Well, meanwhile, the leader of this province's Registered Nurses Union is applauding the move, saying healthcare workers are more likely to face violence at work than police officers or prison guards. She says day-to-day stress has only been compounded by the COVID crisis.
No healthcare worker, no client should be should face demonstrators when they are trying to get healthcare services. And one example of that I know was at Waterford Valley High this past weekend, and they had to actually shut down the clinic. And that's just not called for. There is no place for that within our system, within our society, that you would do that to healthcare workers or to the public who are trying to get healthcare services.
After a busy weekend weather-wise, things quiet down yesterday, but another system rolling through today, bringing some showers to eastern portions of the island. Let's take a look at what's going on. There's actually an area of low pressure to the north and a cold front extending through that, and we're starting to see that cold front move further east, and in behind that, the temperatures are really dropping. So those single-digit highs that we saw earlier today, once that cold front moves through and those winds change, we will see that transition potentially to a few flurries before ending as we head through the overnight tonight as that cold front sweeps through. Now, this pattern over the next little bit is going to be more of a freeze thaw. We'll see these temperatures dipping thanks to where the jet stream is and then warming up as we get into the next week, and then continuing to fall and then warm again. So if you like snow, definitely not the pattern, but I'll get into the full forecast, break that down for you coming up.
Thanks, Ashley. A paramedic in Glovertown says the province needs extra help. Jane Denty says paramedic protocols are constantly shifting, which is stressful on those in the job. And because there's not enough staff, she says paramedics are banking a lot of overtime and losing time with their own families.
It's difficult maintaining your passion and to continue on working. You know, we don't see the numbers that we're seeing in the big centers, but, you know, it certainly reflects in our day-to-day operations. It's had a big impact mentally and physically on us. Omicron has been, you know, doubly, we say, like, with your precautions, you know, you really have to be careful, and it takes time out of your calls, and it wears on the passion of the job. You treat every call as possible COVID, you know, and that takes time. If you go to a cardiac arrest, families are waiting. A minute seems like hours. So add 2 or 3 minutes on top of that, preparing yourself for these, to go in and help and protect yourself. And like you say, your family is stressing. People are certainly stressed and people are fatigued. We just need support. We need extra manpower. I think the whole system needs to be looked at, maybe overhaul the whole system to make it possible. We work a 3-tiered system, really, because we have a provincial system, and we have private operators, and we also have think that there may even be a couple of volunteer services in places with fire departments and things. So I think the overall system in Newfoundland and Labrador needs to really be looked at. And during a pandemic is probably not the time to do that. But when we get through this, and we will get through it, I think it's time to reassess the whole healthcare system, especially when it comes for us, of course, pre-hospital, because that's where I'm at.
Well, with nearly 6,000 active cases of COVID in the province right now, plus all the contacts who are isolating, labor groups are once again calling on the provincial government to help low-wage workers who can't afford to stay home. Mary Shortall, the president of the Newfoundland and Labrador Federation of Labor, joins us now. So right now, the province mandates 7 days of unpaid leave. What kind of changes would you like to see?
Well, the issue with unpaid leave is that we still have many workers in the province who are not covered by paid leave provisions through their employer. And they often have to make that difficult decision about whether or not to stay home from work when they're feeling unwell. I mean, we know that a proven key measure to protect public health is to make sure that you stay home if you're not feeling well. But if it means you can't afford to feed your children or to survive, then you're going to probably have to be faced with that very, very difficult decision. Our Federation of Labor has been saying that there should be adequate employer-paid protection for workers so that they can stay home and know that they're going to be paid for that when they're not feeling well.
What is adequate?
Well, we've been asking for 10 days. That's what the federal government just released just prior to Christmas. It's been, there was times early in the pandemic when we were asking for a certain number of paid sick days and then emergency paid days. But across the board now, with 10 employer paid days because of isolation periods and other issues would be an appropriate amount in our opinion.
Is there a renewed urgency from your perspective on this right now? As I mentioned off the top, there are nearly 6,000 people in the province right now who have COVID. More people are isolating. This is a changing landscape. We haven't seen this level of COVID in our province before. How urgent is it that something gets put in place so that more people can stay home without feeling financially penalized for it?
Well, it's absolutely urgent, especially now. And we're hearing, Dr. Fitzgerald and others saying that the chances are that many of us will contract COVID at some point. But the problem is containing when that happens and how fast that happens and making sure that the hospitals are available to treat the people who really need to be treated when that happens. And so if people are just going to work without paying attention to how they're feeling or how much contact they've been in with people who more and more are becoming positive with COVID. And contact tracing is not even something that's able to be done now because of the widespread of it. Then if there was ever a time when this should be done, it's right now.
Okay, Mary Shortall, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for reaching out.
Well, in other news, ski season is now underway in the province. All 3 downhill ski resorts are open.
The managers of Marble Mountain and White Hills in Newfoundland and Smoky Mountain in Labrador are all hoping for a busy season and say there's been a bump in skiing since the beginning of the pandemic.
This is our opening weekend, and so it started yesterday at 10. Conditions here were a little gnarly at that time, and we had some wind to contend with and snow and whiteouts, but as you can see here today, day number 2, we got a bluebird day, and it's absolutely gorgeous here at White Hills Resort. The benefit right now for all of the ski resorts anywhere in Canada, we're outside. So we get fresh air, we get to socially distance that much better. Of course, we're seeing fewer hospitalizations than in the past, and things are looking good. People want to be outside and be able to space and feel safe, and this is a great place to do that.
On the mountain, it's going to be the same. In the lodge, it's obviously going to be different, but people stay in their pods or their tight tents or whatever, and respect the distancing. I mean, our tables are well far apart. There's 6 chairs at each one, and I don't think Some of us have more than 6 friends, but not all of us.
I can just plan for the best. And, we can't hide behind COVID forever. I do want to welcome the world and Canada, and however we choose to market ourselves when the time is right. We're confident that we have a safe destination that is Newfoundland, and the outdoor product that is the skiing and snowboarding. If people can isolate when they come here, whatever it might be, we're going to have a great product this year.
Well, if you love skiing, you're certainly going to love the forecast for the West Coast. Looks like some more snow squalls on the way. I'll have the full forecast after the break.
This weather update is brought to you by the NL 511 app. Know before you go. Check road conditions, highway cameras, and the provincial plow tracker with the NL 511 app.
Time for a look at the forecast. Some beautiful sunshine yesterday here in the east. Rain today, mild temperatures. What else is in store for us over the next few days?
Yeah, it kind of feels like it's just been this constant freeze, thaw, and like I said a little bit earlier, it does look like this is going to continue but we're on the freeze end of it now. Let's take a look at what we saw today as the daytime highs. Pretty much all of the island saw those temperatures above zero, except around the northern peninsula, right along the strait there. And then Labrador sitting in the minus double digits, but relatively mild considering it's been fairly cold for the last little bit. Minus 12 was the afternoon high in St. John's, or in Lab City rather. Here's where we sat today in St. John's, hovering around the 6-degree mark. Now we're down on that downward turn, and those temperatures are going to continue to drop as a cold front sweeps through. You can see Gander, Badger, even Terra Nova hovering near or below zero already. So we will see those temperatures drop in the next couple of hours, but because we've been seeing all of this rain in the east, there's a good chance that whatever is on the ground will probably freeze through the overnight, so definitely keep an eye on that one. But temperatures will drop as those winds shift from southwesterly to northwesterly as we get into the morning hours. And that's really the story across the board, dropping down to the minus teens through central, west coast, much colder up across Labrador again tonight, minus 21 in in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, minus 26 in Lab City, but those winds are really going to ramp up, so expect wind chills fairly cold into the minus 30s as we head through the overnight tonight. Now, as far as what's going on right now, a few showers in the mix as well as some flurries, and that will continue to push through for the next couple of hours, and then that should end. But we're back into that westerly flow along or at least onshore flow for the west coast. And it does look like the chance of some snow squalls. Good snow squall setup tonight, marginal, really good chance that we'll see that through the day tomorrow. Models are picking up on that really well as we head through tomorrow morning. Even parts of southern parts of the island could see a few squalls develop as well. But that's pretty much it. Other than that, we'll see some flurries scattered across the island and fairly quiet up across Labrador, except a few flurries as well. So as far as snowfall amounts go, the best chance of seeing the most snow will be on the west coast. Again, looking about 5 to 10 centimeters as we get into tomorrow morning in some of the squalls, but there are some areas that could pick up 10 to maybe 15 centimeters as well. And that will be in the heavier and more persistent squalls through Wednesday morning. Here's your temperatures, minus single digits, minus double digits through the northern peninsula, but the winds will be generally out of the west, about 20 to 40 kilometers per hour. Some sunshine for the eastern half of the island. And then we're looking at those temperatures into the minus double digits, minus teens for Mary's Harbour, same thing for Makkovik. And again, chance of flurries, some sunshine in the mix though as well, but some flurries will move in late day for Lab City, hovering around minus 25 as your daytime highs, so much colder than today, and those winds will be out of the west about 20 to 40 kilometers per hour. So like I said, we're in the cold part of this. We are going to see a warm up for parts of the island as we get into late week, and then even some more rain and wind on the way again. I'll have those details when I come back.
Well, now to the West Coast, where 2 seniors' homes are grappling with COVID outbreaks. In Kippens, at least 43 staff and residents tested positive, and in Bay St. George, around 90 staff and residents tested positive there. Dr. Monica Dutt, the medical officer of health for Central and Western Newfoundland, joins us now. So how concerned are you that we're seeing seniors' homes with dozens of staff and patients infected?
So it's definitely concerning. It's something all through the pandemic that we've really worked hard to try to prevent in terms of having people who may be more vulnerable to severe illness and death acquire COVID-19.
Can you tell us anything about how severe the disease is in these areas that we're seeing from these infections?
We've had very good vaccination uptake in most of our homes. Most residents have at least 2, often their 3rd dose of vaccine, and both staff at facilities and public health has worked really hard to do that. And I think that is one of the main reasons why, as of yet, we have not seen a lot of severe illness. There has been nobody in the facility from Bay St. George who has required hospital care. And so that has been really good to see.
And the long-term care home in Bay St. George, that has shared facilities like bathrooms. How much do you think did that contribute to the spread? And how can you get people to isolate away from each other in an environment like that?
There have been challenges for sure, but in that building, what we did very quickly, as soon as we knew there was an exposure within the building, we knew that there were some residents positive. The team on the ground, as well as from other places in the RHA, very quickly put in place a whole range of different measures, ranging from how residents were located within the facility, what staff were working where, personal protective equipment was put in place, testing protocols were put into place. And although we did see an increase in the beginning of people who are positive, and we're still seeing some people positive, it is definitely slowed down. So our hope is that by putting all the measures in place that we have, we will not see ongoing transmission. What we're catching now is likely what has already passed before all the new measures were put into place.
And with so much transmission happening in the province right now, is there any way of keeping it out of the seniors' homes? Is prevention even realistic at this point?
I think there's always multiple layers that have to be in place. So we have measures to try to prevent any virus from coming into the facility. So that's things like screening. Right now, there are some restrictions on visitors. We have other protocols like for testing. So all personal care home staff and long-term care facility staff will have regular antigen testing. And then, of course, vaccination. And then in the facility, all kinds of measures in place within the facility. And then if there ever is introduction of the virus, then many measures that are put in place afterwards. We look at things like ventilation, all kinds of different factors. So it's very layered. So of course, we'd like to prevent it completely, and that's what we try to do. But there are different layers at different stages that we put in place to try to minimize the impact.
All right, Dr. Monica Dutt, thank you so much for this update.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Well, as we reported earlier, this spring, the province will bring in legislation to create safe zones around schools and healthcare facilities. This after protesters prevented more than 50 people from getting vaccinations this weekend. Here Now's Mark Quinn spoke with John Hogan, the Minister of Justice and Public Safety.
We've certainly seen over the weekend, and if you recall, at some point last year, there were some protests around vaccination clinics and a hospital here in St. John's. And we want to make sure that people who are going into and out of these facilities and these sites to, in this case, get vaccinations against COVID-19 are protected from intimidation and interference. They want to feel safe. They want to know that when they go to do what is right for them and for the general public in getting vaccinated, that they're protected and they don't have to worry about anything other than getting their vaccine in this case. We also want to make sure that the people who are in there, healthcare providers, other workers, doing work on behalf of all people in this province aren't intimidated or affected either by doing their jobs and doing what they know is right.
And of course, the timing is interesting. There was a protest this past weekend. Did this protest on the weekend, did it spark this, or was this in the works for some time?
So it's certainly, we were aware of a protest last year, and we've seen some legislation in provinces across the country, and there are changes coming to the federal criminal code again to deal with the situation. So it was on our radar, and certainly the protests over the weekend made us look at it in further detail to make sure we were going to do what was right for the people in this province. And we saw it as a good time to tell the public today after the weekend that it is something that we're going to bring to the House as soon as we come back for our spring sitting. The point really, the major thing is for everyone to know, we want to be crystal clear that these sites there'll be unobstructed access to these sites in the future, and that's the point of this legislation. Other thing that we want people to know is that it's not just limited to vaccination sites. It's not just because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We realize that there could be other situations in the future where intimidation could occur. So this legislation will exist beyond the pandemic whenever we get there. And it'll also apply to educational facilities in the province, such as schools. Teachers, parents, students shouldn't have to be intimidated or interfered with when they're coming and going from these facilities.
And will the Safe Zones bill that's being introduced, will that set out penalties as well?
Yeah, it will set out penalties, and we'll look at things like fines and imprisonment. Of course, the legislation is not drafted yet. It's something that we're going to work on and bring forward in the spring. And of course, as everyone knows, that'll be debated and there could be changes made at that point in time. So I don't want to commit to exactly what those penalties, fines, imprisonment terms are going to look like. But there does have to be some teeth in this legislation, as with any legislation, to make sure that people are aware that if they do breach it, there will be consequences for their actions.
And I wonder if you could talk more about why you're including educational facilities.
So, first we did realize that vaccines could and will be done, and I think they have been done. Vaccinations have taken place at schools in this province, so that's one reason to do it. Second reason, we just feel it is an important. They're important facilities where people need to be protected. Teachers and healthcare workers are two of the most important workers that we have in this province. They're frontline workers. They do the good and the bad and the ugly every day for us, and we just feel that those are people and individuals that do need to be protected from interference and intimidation.
And how broad will this be? I mean, will this, for example, prevent protests at Memorial University?
So the legislation will define what we mean by healthcare facilities and educational facilities. Right now, I anticipate it being limited to schools for K-12, but of course, we're open to debate on that when the legislation comes forward in the spring.
Is there any concern that this might violate the Charter of Rights and Freedoms?
No, so we do. I do want to make that point that this legislation will maintain a lawful right to strike. It's an important right that is enshrined in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms here in Canada. And individuals or groups that are lawfully striking will be able to do it on site within that 50-meter zone. But they will not be able to breach the legislation with regards to interference and intimidation, and that's not the point of a strike anyways. They're not there to intimidate and interfere with healthcare workers and teachers, students, parents, etc. So I think the legislation can and will coexist with the Charter rights for striking.
Why do this when the federal government, as you pointed out, has similar legislation coming?
So it's similar legislation in that it deals with intimidation and interference issues. Certainly ours is going, like I said, beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. And us as a province, we have jurisdiction to deal with this as well. We don't have jurisdiction to deal with matters like the criminal code. Some of these matters might not be criminal per se, but they still may be subject to fines. So there could be a different standard in the courts when individuals breach this as opposed to them breaching the criminal code. So we do want to do everything within our power, within our legislative power, to help protect people in Newfoundland and Labrador.
And finally, we're in the thick of vaccination program right now. This legislation would be introduced in the spring. What happens in the interim if someone protests outside a vaccination clinic now?
So again, the RNC was there on site this weekend to ensure that the laws under the criminal code and other statutes in this province are being followed, and that will continue up until the spring. That is the first opportunity that we'll have to bring forward new legislation to enhance anything that's already existing. And that's why we're announcing it today, and that's what we intend to do.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Minister Hogan.
Thank you. Have a good day.
While at today's COVID-19 briefing, the health minister said there's no perfect measure of COVID-19 in this province. The daily case count doesn't really give the full picture. Health officials rely on a number of different factors. Here's infectious disease specialist Dr. Lisa Barrett explaining how the experts are determining just how much Omicron is out there.
Right now, we're only testing a certain subgroup of people, so the case count is far lower than the actual number of cases in our communities. So that's the first thing. The second part of that, why not just look at the case counts? Well, it's not just the amount of virus around in our community that matters, it's the impact of that virus. And there are better and different ways to measure that. The first one would be how many hospitalizations we have, not just for COVID lung disease. Even if their lungs aren't severely affected, often their other medical problems can get worse and they can end up in hospital. We also look at the number of people in ICUs. It's important because it really does speak to the severity of the disease, and also because ICU beds in every health system are very few compared to general beds. We want to know and be able to tell people how severe the disease is when they get it, but also we want to be able to plan for those very few beds. Instead of looking solely at the number of cases, it's really important to look at what percentage of the people getting tested are positive. And if that number is still high or going up, it's pretty darn sure that we haven't reached the peak of spread of virus in our community. So that percent positivity allows us to standardize across how many tests are done each day and look at what the percentage of positive people is in our community. Recognizing still that because we're doing less testing, that we're still severely underestimating the real number of positive people in our community. Wastewater, including sewage, comes from humans, as we know, among other creatures. And that wastewater has the ability for us to somewhat measure what the virus level in a given area is. What exactly it means and how much background noise there is still debatable, but certainly in some parts of the world, especially as we ramp down testing, it may have a more and more important role in helping us to get early signals of when we may want to look for virus in our communities and start testing more in a certain area. So right now we've gone from using one thing to look at to having to measure 4, 5, 6 things, but we still have some hope of using all those other numbers and a little bit of common sense in order to get us through these next number of weeks.
Well, there's new information tonight about a hidden cost paid by Nova Scotia Power customers, and it's all because of Muskrat Falls. Ratepayers in that province have spent more than $200 million over the last 4 years to replace electricity that was expected but not received from the mega project. Paul Withers has more.
Muskrat Falls was supposed to supply about 10% of the province's electricity starting in 2018. The replacement energy cost is a calculation of the fuel purchase needed to generate the make-up electricity.
It's a very significant number.
Bill Mahody represents NSP residential ratepayers. He says this is more fallout from the failure of Muskrat Falls to deliver hydro into Nova Scotia.
If the energy had been flowing over the Nova Scotia, over the Maritime Link, we would have avoided needing to spend that $205 million over that period of time.
NSP parent company Emera tried to keep the amount hidden, citing commercial confidentiality, but that claim was rejected by regulators who said the disclosure was of significant public interest. The information was released on Christmas Eve. The extra costs have been rolled into NSP's fuel bill, which fluctuates and is adjusted annually, so they cannot be directly tied to rates. The overall cost of the Maritime Link to ratepayers, however, is known. Nova Scotia Power customers have spent $450 million for the transmission system so far. Bill Mahody says these early challenges need to be put in perspective for a project that will deliver a stable source of low-carbon electricity for at least 35 years.
And the attributes of that energy, being renewable energy, will provide significant benefits for ratepayers in answering the various environmental requirements that the Nova Scotia system needs to meet.
That helps us meet our carbon reduction targets.
It does, and it opens up a new line of supply for electricity coming into the province, which is a substantial development, positive development.
Last summer, Muskrat Falls did finally start delivering the so-called Nova Scotia block, but only at 19% of contracted levels. Enough for Emera to submit its final bill for the Maritime Link, $1.7 billion it wants to recover from Nova Scotia Power customers. Paul Withers, CBC News, Halifax.
Actor and comedian Bob Saget has died. He was discovered in his hotel room in Orlando yesterday, where he had been performing this weekend. Last night, fans gathered outside the San Francisco home that was the setting for Saget's very successful sitcom Full House. The show ran for 8 seasons, starting in 1987, with Saget playing the widowed father Danny Tanner. Saget also hosted the first version of America's Funniest Home Videos and toured as a successful stand-up comedian for years. Police say there are no indications foul play or drugs were involved. Bob Saget was 65 years old.
An incredible rescue by a group of Los Angeles police officers over the weekend. They pulled out an injured pilot after his plane crashed just moments before it was hit by a train. Just watch this.
Go, 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 go!
That's police body cam footage showing officers dragging the injured man away from the plane just before the commuter train plows through the wreckage. Phone video taken by bystanders shows the impact of the flying debris. The pilot crash-landed on the tracks shortly after takeoff from a nearby airport. He was the only person on board and was taken to hospital for treatment. There are no reports of any other injuries. The train sustained minor damage.
Incredible. Well, picture a sea creature that's shaped like a dolphin, but larger than an adult orca. Well, that's the size of a fossil recently found in the East Midlands in England. What first looked like some old rusted pipe turned out to be the long vertebrae of an ichthyosaur. The 180-million-year-old fossilized remains were found by a team during a routine draining of a lagoon island. It measures 10 meters, though the prehistoric predator could be more than twice that length. Commonly known as sea dragons, these marine reptiles went extinct around 90 million years ago. Well, southeast of Hamilton, Ontario, is an abandoned cemetery, a final resting place for many Black settlers, including the nephew of a famed anti-slavery icon. Well, thanks to some local volunteers, it will soon be restored. The CBC's Angelina King has more on the discoveries still being made there.
Aileen Duncan has been researching her family's history since she was a teen, but up until a couple of weeks ago, she had never seen this important link, her great-great-grandfather's grave.
I was so emotional that I was speechless.
She has 3 direct family members buried here, but so far only 2 of the gravestones have been uncovered. She's anxiously waiting for Haldimand County to clean up the area and find more.
I'd like to see the stones resurrected. I like to see grass on the ground and benches.
Under the debris, the gravestones of freedom seekers who escaped slavery in the U.S. in the 1800s, using the Underground Railroad to find freedom in Canada. Famed slavery abolitionist Harriet Tubman led hundreds of them through that secret passage. One of her nieces was laid to rest here. Local historians say 10 others were buried at this cemetery, but believe there's more. So far, 7 gravestones have been uncovered, but while we were working on this story, we actually found an 8th. This here is Harriet Tubman's nephew through marriage. The cemetery is on private land and isn't easy to get to, but a group of volunteers and descendants has been advocating to make it accessible and restore it.
They deserve respect, and from a broader societal point of view, recognizing that they were here and that they helped build our society is deeply important.
Haldimand County is in the process of acquiring the land and has budgeted $100,000 to clean up the cemetery, validation for some descendants.
The fact that our family survived and are worth being recognized.
Sometimes cemeteries are the only tangible evidence of Black settlements, this historian says.
Often, sadly, because of racism, because of ignorance, because of migration, the presence of people of African descent in certain communities is completely erased.
The children, the marriages, and the deaths.
That's why this local historian has been pushing for the preservation for years. She says Haldimand County is home to at least 6 other abandoned Black cemeteries.
This is a forgotten history. It's a story that should be told.
This is another stone that
starting with giving new life to this cemetery, which Duncan hopes will serve as a place of solitude, honor, and education.
I want the public to be able to come in here and see that this is part of Canadian history.
Angelina King, CBC News, Haldimand County.
Ashley is back with a look at the long range, and earlier you were talking about this freeze-thaw pattern that we've been in. How much longer will that continue as you're looking ahead to later this week?
Yeah, actually looking even further than that, it is going to continue, it looks like, until the end of January. At least that's as far as they go right now. Now, it does look like we're going to stay in this cold pattern, at least the temperatures well below zero through Wednesday. Let's take a look at that forecast. Not a whole lot happening weather-wise, just the chance of a few flurries again, likely some sunshine in the east, but the potential for a little bit more snow, at least along the west coast. Some areas on the west coast could see 20 plus centimeters. That's including what's falling tomorrow and then through the day on Wednesday. So you're definitely going to see a big chunk of snow over the next couple of days. And then for Labrador, temperatures hovering into the minus teens again, dipping into the minus 20s though for Lab City. And again, you're looking at that chance of flurries right across the board. So that system Wednesday into Thursday is when the next one will move through. So that's going to bring the snow to parts of the west coast. Then we get back into that southerly pattern, and this is when we see those temperatures bump up. Now, there's a bit of a disagreement in exactly what's going to happen, but this is an early look. At this point, we're looking at those temperatures bumping up in the late evening and overnight, so we will likely see that transition through to rain for the eastern half of the island by the time we get there, with temperatures hovering between 2 to 4 degrees through most of Thursday. Now, a little bit of sunshine to start for St. John's, but that rain will move in. And then for the west coast, looking like you should stay on the cold side of this, with the chance of flurries, but -1 for Corner Brook. And then up across Labrador, the flurries will move along with it, but you are looking at some sunshine and temperatures in the minus teens or minus 20s. And then looking ahead to the weekend already, temperatures for St. John's and eastern Newfoundland look like they're going to stay up above zero. Friday, around 5 degrees with some sunshine. And then by the time we get into Saturday, that's when the next system will move in. Some windy conditions as well as some rain, and those temperatures staying above zero. Now, as we head through the evening hours, those temperatures again are going to drop. So we're looking at the transition back to snow, likely with those onshore winds for the west coast. Your daytime highs, though, again into the single digits through the day. And then for Labrador, you're looking at your temperatures really warming up. Now, for eastern Labrador, we could see those temperatures even up above zero by the time we get into Saturday night. That's a little bit of a disagreement, but that potential's there. And then for western Labrador, -30 by Friday with sunshine, but those winds will ramp up with a chance of flurries on Saturday and a high near -23. Now, I had to share this photo. Look at this, really high seas this weekend thanks to that system, but made for a beautiful picture in Port de Grave. She called this one Great Big Sea. Thank you to Lorraine for that. And if you have any weather photos, share them at nlphotos@cbc.ca.
What a smashing shot.
Ah, spectacular. Well, speaking of all that wintry weather, veterinarians are reminding pet owners to take some winter weather precautions. While there's everything from dog boots to parkas out there, vets say owners still need to be observant and cautious. CBC video producer James Young has some tips.
The same issues that hit humans can hit animals in this cold weather. The biggest issue, though, is that they can't talk and tell us that they're cold, so it's up to us to watch for signs that they're not doing well outside. Those signs could be things like shivering, just like we would do, and very commonly with dogs is picking their paws up, and because their paws tend to get cold fastest, and so they do a little dance where they're holding a paw up or two paws up, and that's when we know it's time to take them inside.
+30, -35 like today, we don't miss a day regardless. 30-second walks is the max we can do with the weather before their paws freeze up. We leave the truck running, locked of course, and then throw them in and they can warm up and then back we go.
Just because you have booties for them and you have a jacket, it doesn't mean that they're not going to get cold. And when we dress, we're fully dressed. Dogs, you can never get them completely dressed, and there's always going to be some spots that are exposed and where they can be at risk for frostbite. Especially in dogs, we'll see it on paws occasionally. The other area that we see it a lot is on the ears, and that's in both dogs and cats. Frostbite won't show up for a half hour to an hour after the damage is actually done. So you'll look at their paw or at their ear tips and it looks perfectly normal, and then all of a sudden, maybe the next day you see that they've lost some hair on the tip of their ear and then it's turning a different color. So by the time we recognize that, it's too late. Another important thing, a lot of people think, oh, he's really cold, I'm gonna put a heating pad around him, or I'm gonna put their paws in warm water. That makes things worse. Let them warm gradually inside, just like we do. If you do recognize changes that are indicative of frostbite, you should see your veterinarian. So we have to be smart about it. Even if they have bulky coats on and boots, they can still be prone to problems.
Oh, so cute.
And quite the fashion outfits we saw there, you know, all the latest this season's in outfits for various doggy fashions.
Yeah, so the little snood, I think it's called a snood, that covers the ears. It's like a little scarf that comes up over. Never mind. I have 2 dogs, but I've tried the booties and it just doesn't work out for me. They can't walk.
They spend their whole time trying to not being
and then
very
they fall
happy.
off, and yeah.
Anyway, it's good advice, especially with the temperatures we're seeing in Western Labrador into those, you know, minus 30s as some of the lows. So yeah, some good tips there.
Yeah, frigid in Western Labrador for sure. Well, that's it for us tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.
Have a great night.